Good morning. Hi. Here's another day of Civil War. We're going to be covering pages 266 to 267. Before we get to that, though, let's go ahead through our people. So here we have the Confederate side, the side that will not stand my wall. Okay? I don't know. My family is starting to say, like, it's symbolic of the fact that they lost the war, that they keep ending on the floor. I've washed the wall. I've retaped them. I've taped them over and over again. I don't know what the problem is, but they're always on the ground. Okay, so this is the President of the Confederacy. Jefferson Davis just fell right out of my head. So funny, yeah. And this is Thomas Stonewall Jackson. Robert E. Lee. By the way, my husband was born on the same day, not the same year, as Robert E. Lee, January 19th, so I can always remember his birthday. And this is James Longstreet and Jeb Stuart, okay? Jeb Stuart actually dies during the Civil War, which I discovered when I was researching something else, which I never actually knew that before, okay? All right, over on the Union side, we have the President, Abraham Lincoln, the man who we're going to talk about today, and the re-election and the assassination and the sad ending to his life. Here is George McClellan, Winfield Scott, Ulysses S. Grant, Ambrose Burnside, and William Tecumseh Sherman. All right, so I'm going to scoot you a little closer now that we went through our guys. Wibble, wibble, wobble. All right, so today we are going to talk about the end of the Civil War, okay? So this is what happened. So in 1865, the spring of 1865, Lee's army was in Richmond, Virginia, and Grant's army was in Richmond, Virginia. Now, Lee had decided his was going to take his army and sneak out to go fight against Sherman. Let's move Sherman. He's a big player today, okay? As you remember from Friday, William Tecumseh Sherman was making his march to the sea, and Lee knew that in order to save the Confederacy, he had to sneak out from Virginia, Richmond, and he had to go help the Confederates defeat, the armies of Johnston, to defeat the armies of Sherman. So he would try to sneak out, and Grant would block him. He would try to sneak out, and Grant would block him. So this went on for a while. Let's move Grant over here too, because, he is important today as well. Wow. The Union guys, they're just not letting go. It is kind of like a metaphor. I can't even get him off. All right. Here he is, Grant. Okay. All right. Sorry. Sherman and Grant. Okay. So every time Lee would go to a certain place to try to escape, Grant would stop him. When Lee went a different place to escape, Grant would stop him. Eventually, Lee figured out that he had no hope, and he decided to just go ahead and surrender. He knew the Confederacy, the fighting was over. There was no way for them to come back. So he decided to surrender to Ulysses S. Grant. Now, the place that they surrendered is called Appomattox Courthouse. That's the name of the city, okay? A lot of people, even some adults that don't know their history very well, think that it is a courthouse, a building that's in Appomattox, but that's not true. The city's name for the surrender is Appomattox Courthouse, Virginia, all right? So that is where Lee surrendered to Grant. So Abraham Lincoln was all about forgiveness and reunifying the Union and the Confederacy. Okay, so when Lee surrendered to Grant, and remember back the beginning of the war, Who was asked to run the army for the Union? Lee, right? So Lincoln didn't really have any animosity toward the Confederacy or toward Lee. So what he told Ulysses to do was to not disgrace Lee. So that was the first thing. So a lot of times when a general would surrender, they would like rip his rank off his shoulders, and it was all this big thing, and they take his horse and take his sword, and they cut like his suspenders, and it was like a huge thing, like, we defeated you and now we're going to humiliate you kind of thing. And Lincoln specifically said, do not do that sort of thing. Not only did he say that, he also said, don't take their guns. These men are going to go back home. They're going to have to hunt for their food, so they need a weapon in order to hunt. He also said, don't take their horses. They're going to need to plant crops. He knew the devastation that was awaiting these Confederate soldiers under Lee's command when they got back home. So he told them they're going to have to plow. They're going to have to plant seeds. They're going to have to grow their food. Don't take their horses. So Grant did not take their horses or their weapons. He just talked to Lee, and Lee made all of his soldiers promise I will not use my weapon against a Union soldier. Okay? And they all left. Okay? That was the whole surrender. Lee went back to his house, his military guys went back to their houses, and they tried to start over. Now, this occurred in the spring of 1865. So we're going to backtrack a little bit. In the, I can't remember now, 1864, but I don't remember what month. I think it was March, but I don't want to say the wrong month. Okay, I don't see it in my notes right now. I think it's March. In 1864, Lincoln ran for re-election. Now, guess who ran against him? George McClellan. George McClellan ran against Lincoln saying, we got to stop the war, we got to stop the war, it's a failure, it's awful, it's horrible, we got to stop the war. Okay, but Lincoln was re-elected for a second term, even though McClellan was like, popular, a war hero, but, he didn't do a great job at the war, though, so he wasn't really a hero necessarily, because remember I said one way to become president is to be a war hero. Look at how many are. But he did not become president. Lincoln was reelected, and he gave a wonderful speech, okay? And he was all about rebuilding the Union back together, which meant to him bringing the Confederacy back into the Union without reprimand, without causing angst to them. Okay, angst is like sorrow, all right? He just wanted to join them back together. He wanted to treat it like, hey, we had a little fight, we've made up, we're all family, let's just get back together. And that's kind of what his acceptance speech was all about. And that's called reunification, okay? And he had a whole plan of how he was going to reunify the North and the South. And unfortunately for the South, that plan did not take place because of a crazy man named John Wilkes Booth. Okay? So, even before the surrender, John Wilkes Booth had plans for Lincoln. So, he was planning with some other people to kidnap Lincoln. So on March 20th, March 20th, they had a kidnap plan. So on March 20th, 1865, they were going to grab Lincoln, and they were going to hold him and demand that a bunch of Confederate soldiers be released. In Booth's mind, he thought if these soldiers were released out of the prisoner of war camps that they were in, that the South could rise and they would still win. Okay? So John Wilkes Booth and his buddies all were staked out at a place. They were all ready for Lincoln to come. And that day, because God intervened, that day Lincoln did not come. Okay, so they were shocked, they were confused, they said, oh, all right, whatever. And then when Lee surrendered to Grant, Booth came up with a new plan. The new plan was to assassinate the president. But not only was his plan to assassinate the president, his plan was to assassinate the president, the vice president, which was Andrew Johnson, he was going to assassinate the Secretary of State, which was William Seward, because what happens is if a president dies, the first person to take over the job is the vice president, which would have been Andrew Johnson. Then if that guy dies, the next person to take it over is the Secretary of State, which at that time was William Seward. So Booth's plan was to kill all three and put the country into chaos. And in the hopes of the chaos, that the Confederacy could swoop in and still win. Okay, he was all about the Confederacy winning the war against the Union. Got it? All right, so plan failed, new plan. So the targets are Lincoln, Seward, Grant, and Johnson. And you might say, Mrs. Johnson, you didn't say anything about Grant. Well, the plan was to assassinate the president at Ford's Theater. The other two people that were supposed to be in Lincoln's box, besides Lincoln and his wife, Mary Todd, was General Grant and his wife. They were supposed to be watching the play together at Ford's Theater. So Booth grabbed his buddy David Harold, and the two of them together had plotted and planned to kill both Lincoln and Grant in the box. Okay? Then Lewis Powell, who was part of this group, he at the same time that Booth is killing Lincoln and Grant in the box at Ford Theater, he is supposed to be killing William Seward. Okay, now a few weeks earlier, William Seward had an accident. His carriage overturned. Remember, they don't have cars back then, right? So he was riding in his carriage and it overturned, and he was laying in his bed at his house. So Lewis Powell, at the same time, goes into Seward's house and stabs him a whole bunch of times. Okay, but Seward ends up recovering from the stabbing. He doesn't die. All right, so George Atzerodt, he is supposed to be killing Johnson. But at the last minute, and I do mean the last minute, like he's hiding and he's got the weapon, and Johnson comes into the area, he just doesn't. He loses his nerve, he gets scared, and he runs away. He decides, this is a crazy plan, I am not doing this, and he left. Okay? So that was the plan for the night. And as you know, plans went awry. So the first thing that fell apart was Grant's wife said, nah, I don't want to go to the play. So they didn't go. So the Lincolns invited a different couple. It was a soldier and his fiancée. Okay, so they were in the booth instead of Grant. Okay, so when Booth and David kind of are there, David doesn't actually go in, but when Booth goes in, he slices the arm of the soldier, and shoots Lincoln in the head. And he yells something, which I can't remember right now, and he jumps out of the box where the president is and is going to go to the ground. But he has stirrups on and it grabs onto a flag, and as he falls, he actually breaks his leg. Okay? Meanwhile, David is coming back. They meet up, and the two of them escape on horseback. And for a little while, the crowd at the theater thinks that this is like part of the show until Mary Todd Lincoln starts screaming at the top of her lungs. When that occurs, they all realize it's not part of the show, and a doctor who happened to be there that night, Dr. Charles Lyell, goes up to see if he can save the president. So he grabs a bunch of men and they take him across the street to a boarding house, and he starts looking at him and he says, no, he's going to die from his wounds. There's nothing I can do to help him. So they go and they get his son who sits by his bedside, and they're all kind of just waiting for President Lincoln to die because there's nothing they can do at this time in history to save him. Now, if he would have been shot at this time, they might have been able to do something, but at that time, the medical wasn't very good, and so there was absolutely nothing they could do. And maybe they couldn't have done anything today either. It just depends on a lot of things. So, he was shot on April 14th, 1865 at 10:15 in Ford's Theater. He was taken across the street, and he died the next day, early morning. He died April 15th, 1865 at 7:22 a.m. He was 56 years old when he died, okay? Which even back then was considered not that old, all right? Okay, so they take off. The Union soldiers are very, 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 very angry because their president has died. The people in the North are very upset. They close the businesses. Tens of thousands of people are on the streets. They're crying. They're upset. They just are very concerned about what happened. The Union soldiers go taking off to try to find Booth and Herold. Okay, remember Herold's his last name, David Herold. Could be first, but it's his last name. They find Booth and Herold hiding in a barn. Okay? So as they're hiding in this barn, the soldiers say, hey, you guys need to come out. And they don't come out, and then they say, look, if you don't come out, we're going to set the barn on fire. So David Herold comes out and surrenders. He's like, I'm done with this. Okay? He ends up getting found guilty of the conspiracy to assassinate the president, and he is actually executed. Okay? John Wilkes Booth says, I am not coming out. Okay? Again, he's all about the South rising again and not being defeated by the Union. So they light the barn on fire. He's kind of in there with his weapon. One of the Union soldiers shoot him. Then he comes out and they interrogate him, which means they ask him questions. Remember we talked about this? An interrogative sentence is a question sentence because when you ask a lot of questions, it's called interrogation. Yes? Just like they interrogated Jesus about who he was and those kinds of things before he went to the cross. Pilate interrogated him, asked him a bunch of questions. So that's what they did with John Wilkes Booth. They asked him a bunch of questions. For 3 hours, they asked him questions. And at the end of the 3 hours, he actually ends up dying from the gunshot wound that he had. Okay? So, now we have David Herold in custody, and John Wilkes Booth is dead. So then what they find out is that they held all these meetings at a woman's boarding house called Mary Stuart. Okay? So Mary Stuart is also arrested for the conspiracy of assassinating a president, and she is also executed. She's the first woman ever to be executed by the government, the U.S. government. Okay? They find George Atzerodt. And even though he didn't actually kill Johnson, again, he was arrested and tried for the conspiracy to assassinate, and he was also executed. And Lewis Powell, they also found him, and the same thing. He was found guilty of also attempted murder of Seward, and he was executed. Okay, so after Booth had jumped and broken his leg, he went to see a doctor named Dr. Samuel Mudd. And Dr. Samuel Mudd set his leg for him. So they found out about that. They arrested Dr. Samuel Mudd for helping Booth. And they said he had to go to jail for the rest of his life. Okay, after a few years, they end up saying, you can come out. That's okay. All right. So he was just the doctor. Nobody really knows if he was conspiring or anything. He was just the doctor. Okay. So on April 26th is when they finally found Booth. Okay. So they were looking for him from the 14th to the 26th. Now, because he was a president and because of just how things were, they end up moving his body from Washington, D.C. to Illinois. Springfield. Yes, that's what I thought. But the way they do it is they do it by a train. And at some of the cities where the train stops, they actually put his casket on a wagon. And that wagon is actually driven through the streets. And people follow the wagon, and people come out to look at the wagon. And there's actually pictures for you to see, original pictures from that time that you're going to look at. I don't think it's today. I think it's next time on Thursday. It's attached, so you'll see. So tens of thousands of people come out and line the streets to watch the train go by. So even if it wasn't a city that they stopped in, they watched the train. Tens of thousands of people came out to follow the casket, to look at the casket. Then he was also laid in state, it's called. So they lay out his body and people can walk by. Okay. Usually they do that I don't know if they did that then, but they do it now in the Rotunda, which is in the Capitol building. They can walk through and see the body. Okay. Say goodbye is what they're doing. It's not just to look at a dead person. Back then, the casket was all closed and everything, so nobody could actually see Lincoln. They just saw his casket. All right. So Lincoln is finally buried at Oak Ridge Cemetery in Springfield. Okay. So that's where he's laid to rest. And actually, they had to move him a couple times because grave robbers would come and dig him up. And so they hid him in a cave kind of thing for a while. And then it was kind of crazy. People are, I don't know what people are thinking, but that's what happened. And so eventually they were able to do things to secure his resting place. Okay. So Abraham Lincoln said that during his presidency, when he first got elected, he was not a Christian. He was not a Jesus follower. But that at some point in his presidency, during one night that he was very distraught, he actually prayed to accept Jesus as his Savior. Now, that's what they say. So, maybe you'll get to see Lincoln in heaven one day. That would be kind of cool. So that is all I have for you today. Please read the 2 pages, 266 and 267. A lot of this stuff isn't even in there. A lot of this stuff is just extra stuff I'm telling you about it. Okay. And then I think there's workbook pages, but I can't remember. I think there are. Check the instructions. It says that. So guess what? Fun times. So what I'm going to do is on some videos at the very end, I'm going to give you a secret password. Okay? So you're going to put that secret password in the private comments. It can only go in the private comments. If you put it there, you're going to get 2 extra points on your assignment for that day. All right? So today, the secret password is Springfield. Okay? He was buried in Springfield, so Springfield is the secret password. So on your private comments, write the word Springfield. Don't put in your assignment, just your private comments for this assignment, private comments, Springfield. Okay, got that? Springfield, you get 2 extra credit points. No Springfield, no extra credit points. You cannot share the secret password with your friends and neighbors because it's a secret password. Okay, if you share the secret password, you will actually lose 2 points from your assignment. So don't share. Okay, all right, so it's our secret, Springfield. All right, I'll see ya. Bye.